Daily Sacramento Kings talk has a new podcast home. It's the Matt George Podcast on Sactown Sports.
They say God leaves his toughest challenges for those of us who are strong enough to be able to handle it. Well, at this point, my fellow Sacramento Kings fans, we've probably reached sainthood. The Kings get demolished by the Boston Celtics tonight, 112-93. That final score, not an accurate representation of how brutal this game was. The Kings fall to 12-38 on the season. Yes, they've reached the 50-game mark. Oh, but we still got 32 more to go. Hello and welcome into the Matt George Podcast. My name is Matt George here, part of Sactown Sports. And if you watched this game start to finish and you're not paid to do so like I am, God bless you. God bless you, but also I'm concerned that you need something better to do with your time here on this Friday night. Believe me, if I could turn these games off, I would. But I can't. But I'm thankful to have this platform, this podcast, to be able to talk through the pain, talk through the frustrations with you. We're going to get into primarily talking about Doug Christie and how do we judge Doug Christie as the head coach of the Sacramento Kings going forward, because I think there's an interesting dynamic there. And I know Doug Christie has or has split the fan base in terms of some who believe in him as a coach and just don't believe he's been given a fair, real shot, and others who think that he's in over his head and not fit to be a head coach. And the way this season has gone is a perfect representation of that. We will get into that today. Plus, we're going to talk about Malik Monk. I'm fine with Malik being here long term. I don't know about you. There's nothing really to talk about with this Kings game. Like, what is there to talk about from this game? It was an ass kicking. The Kings got their ass kicked. They could not score. The veterans got off to a really poor start and didn't play much at all. DeMar DeRozan played 18 minutes in this game. Zach LaVine played 23 and a half minutes, led the Kings in scoring with 17 points. Dennis Schroeder also played 23 and a half minutes in this game. No Russell Westbrook, he's out. Domantas Sabonis was also out, second night of a back-to-back, some load management on his knee. This is the second set of back-to-backs that he's missed the second game since returning from that knee injury. Of course, Keegan Murray is not playing right now too. At least Malik Monk did return, and again, we'll talk about Monk later on. How do we judge Doug Christie going forward? I want to hear your answer to this question, but I have an answer myself that you may or may not understand, like, or appreciate. I will say we cannot ignore everything that has happened to this point. We cannot ignore how Doug has fared from the minute really he took over for Mike Brown as an interim head coach midway through last season to just over a calendar year later, where he's at now with this basketball team that is quite literally one of the worst in the history of the Sacramento Kings. That's not an over-exaggeration. They are literally amongst the worst in this franchise's history, at least in the Sacramento era. And that's saying something, because we've had a lot of really, really bad teams here in Sacramento. For Doug, there have been moments of inconsistent messaging, saying one thing and showing another on the floor. Some confusing rotations, which guys were playing, which guys weren't. Guys that weren't playing seemingly would fit the messaging or fit the identity that Doug Christie and Scott Perry have talked so much about. Others who don't fit that identity at all, seemingly getting more playing time, getting a longer leash, right? We saw the frustrations of Doug Christie on full display with some of his press conferences earlier in the season. That tone completely flipped, has completely changed. Now more of an acceptance of the bad. And whether it's buzzwords, over-focus on the defense and sometimes just brushing the offensive concerns under the rug, sticking with the same terms like the standard, meeting the standard, right? There's plenty of stuff that Doug Christie has done that I personally, over this last, especially this season, have not been too thrilled by, to say the least. But I will stay consistent with the feeling and the belief that I had coming into this season. And that's that this roster, the construction of this roster, is so flawed that it really was never going to be a fair representation of who Doug Christie can be as a head coach. I'm not trying to give Doug a total pass because there is a lot of talent on this roster. But I also believe that if you could pick another more established coach around the league right now and make them the head coach of the Sacramento Kings, if you were to go to Miami and take Eric Spoelstra and put him in charge of this team here in Sacramento, I don't know how much better he would do. Because I think this roster is so terribly constructed, it's so fundamentally flawed. Just because you have a bunch of talent does not mean that talent is cohesive in any way. And that's even more clear, not just by how bad this team has fared this year, but think about the two teams that made it to the NBA Finals last year. The Indiana Pacers and the Oklahoma City Thunder. What did both of those two teams have in common? A tremendous amount of depth, guys who understood their role and how to play it, built around one central playmaking star. Of course, OKC has the reigning MVP in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and the Pacers had Tyrese Halliburton, with the addition of Pascal Siakam, who could take over some of those star power responsibilities at times when needed. Right, two teams that emphasized depth and guys who played together and knew their roles and played their roles well. Meanwhile, in Sacramento, you have this hodgepodge combination of talent that at their best just plays a your turn, my turn isolation offensive system, and on defense has never been known for their ability to stop the ball, with the exception of one or two solid enough individual defenders that can't save an overall poor team defense. The construction of this roster is horrible, and I do think that plays a significant factor in how we look at Doug Christie as a coach. So how do we judge him going forward? Truth be told, wins and losses are not important. What is important for Doug Christie's future is development. Can he be the right coach for right now to help this rebuilding team develop into something better? Let's be honest, the Kings and Doug Christie have to earn the right for us to talk about Doug in the sense of, can he be the coach to put this team in the playoffs and lead them to the playoffs perpetually? And then he has to earn the right after that to, can this coach coach the Kings to an NBA championship? Believe me, Doug is a long way off from anything like that. A long way off. So if you're concerned that the Kings probably won't be able to win a title with Doug Christie or make the playoffs every single season consistently with Doug Christie, those concerns might be valid, but you got to crawl before you can walk and walk before you can run. And the Sacramento Kings haven't even started crawling yet. What works in Doug Christie's favor is something that I shared last week. I've been told firsthand that the young players really, really like Doug Christie. They like playing for Doug Christie. They like being developed by Doug Christie. They like learning from Doug Christie. And from my experience interacting and talking to Doug this season, the most joy I've seen from Doug is when he talks about teaching and working with these young guys. He lights up when you talk about Maxime Reynaud, or the development of Dylan Cardwell, or the progress of Nick Clifford. And we've seen development and progress from all three of those. The centers mainly, Nick still has to show a little bit more. Nick has to catch up a little bit. But we've seen a tremendous amount of growth from both Maxime Reynaud and Dylan Cardwell this season that leads one to be encouraged that maybe Doug can be the right guy to get to get these young players and push them in the right direction and build them into something that's hopefully a perpetual playoff contender one day. Then when we get to that point, we can start worried about, is Doug Christie a good enough coach to win you enough basketball games to get you there permanently, and start talking about deep playoff runs and potentially championship trophies. We truly can't look that far ahead right now, and I truly don't believe the Sacramento Kings are. But Scott Perry does owe it to Doug Christie to give him a fair and true opportunity next season to show if he's capable of being that developmental coach. And what I mean by that is Scott Perry has to do everything in his power to make sure the core of this roster is not the same on opening night or the start of training camp next year as it is right now. And I'm talking primarily about the veterans. If the Kings roll into next season with Domantas Sabonis, DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, and Dennis Schroeder all still being on the roster, and I'll even go as far as to say if all three of Sabonis, LaVine, and DeRozan are on this roster still, regardless of what draft pick they get and who the Kings draft with that pick, Scott Perry is still not giving Doug what he needs to show that he can be an effective coach. At that point, we will judge and look at Doug based off of month-to-month improvement. If we cannot clearly see or say or talk about, man, this team has improved, these groups, these individual guys, these young guys have improved individually from the start of the month to the end of the month. This team has gotten better in this era or showed clear progress from the start of the month to the end of the month. I'm not talking about the Kings from game 1 to game 82 going from terrible to great. That's unrealistic. But every single month, we should see solid, consistent growth from a young, moldable, developing Sacramento Kings roster next season. That doesn't mean there aren't any veterans, period, on this roster. In just a second, I'm going to talk about how I'm excited about the idea of Malik Monk potentially being here long term. I have a feeling Domantas Sabonis is still going to be here. And the Kings, it sounds like, aren't too bothered by starting this rebuild with Domantas Sabonis here, as long as Sabonis is less of a hostage and more of a volunteer about it. But if you get the number 1 pick in the draft, and let's say you take Peterson, or AJ DeBonza, or Cam Boozer, or whoever you want, and you have veterans, current veterans on this roster that are actively standing in the way of their development because they need their touches and they need their minutes, you're setting Doug Christie up to fail already. So Scott Perry owes it to his head coach and owes it to the fan base, quite frankly, to give us something different and give us a group, a core that actually matches or meets the vision and the buzzwords and the pillars that you've been floating out there since your introductory press conference. That's Scott Perry's job. And I'm hoping he can start to address that at the trade deadline in 5-6 days. If he can't, well then, he's got a lot of work to do this summer. But regardless, the roster should make more sense for Doug to then take over and show that he can develop it, he can mold it, he can build it to improve month over month, week over week, game over game over the course of next season. That's how we'll judge Doug Christie as a head coach. It's based off of that and those results that should decide whether or not Doug gets another contract. Because if Doug does get a young group, does get a core and a foundation that makes sense, I'm not expecting them to win a bunch of games next season. I'm not expecting them to flirt with 500 or be a play-in team or anything of that nature. I expect the Kings to be bad next year. But if they are not showing clear improvement over the course of the season, then I think Scott Perry can feel pretty confident and comfortable that maybe we need to get a different head coach in here that can develop these guys properly. Maybe Doug isn't ready for this kind of role. We can worry about the Mark Jackson dilemma like what the Golden State Warriors went through down the road. Because maybe we do get to a point with Doug where he is able to develop this group and they're on the door of the playoffs. Maybe they make a playoff or two, but they're first round exits or they're there, but they're not able to take that next leap. And then Mark Jackson is fired in Golden State, Steve Kerr comes in, and we know what happened to that Warriors dynasty. Maybe Doug Christie reaches those crossroads eventually. But right now, in my opinion, the Sacramento Kings need to give him a clear and fair roster and a cohesive group that makes sense that Doug can really start to develop. And if he's not able to develop them, then I think that should tell us everything we need to know about him as a head coach. The only thing good from tonight's game is that the young guys played. They played a lot of minutes. Maxime Reynaud played 36 minutes in this game. I thought it was one of his more impressive games that he's had in a while. 14 points, 6 of 7 from the field, went 1 of 1 from three-point range, took a three, it was contested. It's still a really slow release, but he knocked it down. Love to see that. Also had 14 rebounds in this game and a block. He did get the start with Domantas Sabonis being out. I thought he got beaten up by starting center for the Celtics, who's also a former Sacramento King, a former two-way player who started his career with the Sacramento Kings, Neemias Queta. Thought Nimi pushed Max around a little bit. That's not surprising. We know that's something that the physicality is something Max has struggled with, that hopefully he will get better as he puts on more weight and gets more work in this summer. But Max got a lot of run. I thought he played really well. Nick Clifford had a really nice bounce-back game after his really poor performance last night. Neek played 34 minutes, 15 points, 5 of 12 from the field, 3 of 7 from three-point range, 3 rebounds, an assist. I like that Neek got an opportunity to run the offense a little bit. He brought the ball up the floor a few times, got some opportunity, especially later in this game when the veterans weren't really playing anymore, to run the show, run the offense. And it wasn't perfect. It wasn't pretty at all times, but he got the opportunity to show that. Got the opportunity to create a little bit with the ball in his hands. Dylan Cardwell played 27 minutes in this game, 8 points, 3 of 4 from the field, 8 rebounds, a steal, a couple of blocks. Dylan Cardwell doing what Dylan Cardwell does. He did have 4 fouls in this game, but he didn't get into a tremendous amount of foul trouble like he normally does, picking up 2 or 3 in a very, very short period of time. So Dylan got run. Dylan got to battle. Hell, even Daquan Plowden, Devin Carter, and Isaiah Stevens got some playing time in this game. And I will give credit to Doug. I know I tweeted about this on social media and I got a lot of smart-ass comments, and I'm not surprised by it because I understand how the tweet reads when you're reading something like this and the Sacramento Kings are getting destroyed by the Celtics and are down like 30 at the time. But I thought the camera caught Doug a number of times, whether it was calling a timeout or when he was subbing one of the young guys out of the game, particularly Max and Neek. He was grabbing them, he was coaching them up. He was not swayed at all by how the game was going, not sitting down and just watching. He was very actively involved, coaching these guys up. At the very least, even if it's the bare minimum, even if it's a low bar, I can appreciate that. I thought he did well in that sense, to be active, to stay involved, and to really take the opportunity to coach these guys up and give them the minutes that they need. Granted, it was, unfortunately, in a blowout. One of the few guys that did play well that wasn't one of the young guys was Malik Monk. Played 23, just shy of 23 minutes. Not the greatest shooting percentage, 3 of 14, 2 of 6 from three-point range. Had 12 points off the bench, 4 assists. I'm a big fan of Malik Monk. And I've talked about since the summertime, since Scott Perry took over and it was clear Malik was being shopped, that I felt that Malik was not getting a fair shake. That's not just from the Kings who are trying to shop him. I thought that was from the market value and how teams were talking about him. Focusing more on the contract, which is not a bad contract by any means, but focusing more on the contract, the amount of years on it, and the amount of money he was making than who he is as an actual basketball player. I think Malik's got incredibly fun game. I think he's really, really good. He's one of the best in that off-the-bench 6-man role. He's been that for a number of years here in Sacramento. And I don't know about y'all, I got absolutely no problem at all with Malik Monk remaining a Sacramento King. If no one wants that contract, then fine. I'm down for Malik Monk playing out the end of his contract, the final 2 years of his deal here in Sacramento. I see the value in Malik Monk's game. I have no problem with Malik being part of the rebuild for a couple of reasons. One, the personality and the energy that he brings, that he plays with, it's infectious. It's needed in that locker room. It's needed in that practice facility. And we see how Malik Monk can change a game coming in off the bench and add energy to a crowd, add energy to a game. That is a Malik Monk specialty. That is Malik's superpower. And I think that's beneficial to have, whether you're in a rebuild on a bad team or on a good team that's trying to make a playoff run like the Kings had the Beam Team years. It's very valuable. And number two is Malik has shown me, at least this season, that he's a good guy to be around the young players. Malik has really seemed to enjoy, whether he was playing or not, Seems to really enjoy working with the young guys, taking the young guys under his wing, giving them advice. Malik's been through some stuff over the course of his career. The way his career started in Charlotte as a rookie, as a young player, did not go well. He was almost out of the league. Then he kind of revitalized his career a little bit in Los Angeles, comes to Sacramento, and he's truly found a home and played the best years of his career to this point. I don't know if the best years of his career are behind him or not, but I do think if he's a King for the next 2 years, that's not a bad thing by any means. So I am more than happy with Malik Monk remaining a Sacramento King. Can't say the same for some of these other veterans on this roster that I hope are gone by the trade deadline. But more likely than not, it seems like they are going to still be here. At least most of them are going to still be here at this point. And look, I've seen the debates, I've seen the conversations, and I understand like the logical debate versus the emotional debate. I understand the logical takes, the logical concerns of like, Matt, the Sacramento Kings should not just make a bad trade for the sake of making a bad trade. The Sacramento Kings should not just sell low on some of this veteran talent just to make a move and get off of their contract. At this point, I pretty much wholeheartedly disagree. I think this team is in desperate need for some some sort of shakeup. And selfishly, there is a part of me that is applying myself and my own feelings as a viewer to that, because I have no interest in watching 32 more games of this garbage. There are 30 games after the trade deadline. And if the only thing the Kings do is trade Keon Ellis, even if we're seeing Neek and Max play more, you want to go through 30 games where the majority of them, or a good portion of them, are like what we saw tonight in Boston? Do you really? Do we think the Golden One Center is going to continue to have these crowds that this organization simply does not deserve but continues to get because they're fortunate enough to play in one of the best cities in the country with one of the most loyal fan bases in the history of sports? Do we think that fan base is going to continue to show up and stick around? I've talked to you season ticket holders. I know how much money you guys are paying. I don't blame any of you who say, man, I need something to get me excited or hopeful or at the very least curious again, or I'm completely tuning out until the draft lottery starts. I'm going to put my viewership into ping pong balls more than basketball until April, or I'll pick things back up in April or May when the ping pong balls matter, when it's draft lottery time. I don't blame you one bit. The analogy that I used on my radio show today with Kayla Anderson, Matt and Kayla, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Sactown Sports, was this organization is a stuffy, sweaty, stinky, just hot, gross room. And this franchise needs to open a freaking window and get a breath of fresh air in here. And to me, a breath of fresh air are some new faces, some needed change, getting some of these contracts or two of these veterans out of here for their sake and for ours, and just changing things up. Change needs to happen. Change needs to happen. Because this is brutal. This is brutal. And even though the young guys will hopefully start to play more, and it is beneficial for them to get court time, I am concerned that if you kick the can down to summertime and now expect all these moves and all this cleanup to be done during the summertime months because you didn't do anything to address it or couldn't do anything to address it at this trade deadline period, you're more than likely walking into next season with still a very similar roster problem. And I'm telling you what, like, we can't have I don't expect the Kings to be good next year. But we can't have 2 seasons in a row of the Sacramento Kings being good while rolling out a core of veterans who do not want to be here and clearly do not coexist on the basketball floor in any sort of efficient, entertaining way. That's not too much to ask. To me, that's the bare minimum for this franchise at this point. Changes are needed. So I'm all for a quote-unquote bad trade. If you think moving on from Domantas Sabonis and getting only a draft pick instead of multiple draft picks in a salary dump type trade, or salary dumping Zach LaVine, or trading Keon Ellis along with DeMar DeRozan, attaching Keon to DeMar DeRozan just so you can get off of DeMar and only get a couple of second rounders in return plus expiring talent. If you think that's a bad trade, well then I disagree with you, because something needs to happen. Some sort of change needs to happen. And I know Scott Perry's working the phones. I know he is. He's been working his phones for months. We got to get something across the finish line. And if the only thing we can get across the finish line is Keon Ellis for maybe a late first rounder or for a couple seconds, but this core veteran group is still here, man, get ready for 30 games of lower back soreness, knee load management, and disinterested fan base. Those 30 games are going to feel a whole hell of a lot longer than these 50 games have felt to this point. Want to hear your thoughts on this, your thoughts on tonight's game, your thoughts on what I had to say about Doug Christie. Look, you might think that's a whole bunch of baloney that I was talking about with Doug. And no, what do you mean, Matt? We have to judge him based off of how he's been now, and he has not done a very good job as a head coach right now. If you feel that way, I'm not here to tell you you're wrong. In fact, feel free to tell me why I'm wrong, or feel free to tell me what you're noticing from Doug Christie as a head coach. How confident are you in his ability to be the developing head coach, the right coach to be there for the start of a rebuild? Or would you rather see the Kings go out and get someone else after they hopefully bring in a top 3, top 4 pick in this upcoming draft? Let's talk about it. At Matt George Sack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. I appreciate your support as always. I will see you on Sunday after Kings and Wizards right here on the Matt George Podcast, part of Sactown Sports.